Garth Brooks arrived in Nashville at the end of the 1980s with dreams bigger than the city had ever seen. Country music at the time was dominated by safe formulas, songs about heartache, small towns, and tradition, sung by artists who rarely strayed from the blueprint carved decades before. Garth came from Oklahoma with those same rural roots, but he carried something extra, an imagination that stretched far beyond Nashville's borders. When his debut album hit in 1989, it landed like a cannonball. If Tomorrow Never Comes and The Dance captured both grit and tenderness, making him relatable to lifelong country fans while also drawing in listeners who had never touched the genre. Within months, he was a phenomenon. By the early 1990s, he wasn't just selling albums, he was selling out arenas. His shows broke every mold country music had. Instead of a man with a guitar standing behind a microphone, he leapt into crowds, sprinted across stages, swung from ropes, smashed guitars, and lit up venues with pyrotechnics. His energy mirrored the biggest rock bands of the era, but his lyrics kept their country soul. Fans adored it. Nashville insiders, however, grew uneasy. The establishment saw him as both a blessing and a threat. On one hand, his albums like No Fences and Ropin', The Wind broke sales records and made country music global. On the other hand, his success blurred the genre's lines. He blended rock, pop, and gospel elements into his music, making purists sneer and call it arena country or country light. Nashville had long prided itself on control, on deciding who fit the mold and who didn't. But Garth didn't wait for permission. He pushed forward with a vision no one could stop. By the mid-1990s, he had outsold legends once thought untouchable. He surpassed Elvis Presley in U.S. album sales, a feat that seemed impossible. Yet with every milestone, resentment grew. Behind closed doors, executives whispered that he was dangerous, too ambitious, too independent. Then came the boldest move of his career, the Chris Gaines experiment. In 1999, Garth unveiled an alter ego with dark hair, a goatee, and a pop-rock sound tied to a planned film project. It was unlike anything Nashville had ever seen. The Chris Gaines album produced hits, with Lost in You charting strongly, but the concept confused audiences and the media mocked it relentlessly. Late-night shows made jokes. Critics labeled it an embarrassment, and Nashville's elite seized the chance to humble him. Instead of celebrating his creativity, they turned it into a scandal. The truth was that Garth had dared to step outside their box, and that terrified the gatekeepers. They wanted the project remembered as a failure, a cautionary tale, and they quietly buried it. But Chris Gaines revealed more about Nashville's fear of losing control than about Garth's supposed misstep. As his fame soared, subtle resistance began to show. Radio programmers who once relied on him cooled toward his new singles. Award shows skipped over him, even in years when his success was undeniable. Industry insiders grumbled that he wanted too much influence over radio playlists and album decisions. They whispered that he had enough trophies already, that his music wasn't real country. It was a quiet blacklisting, not enough to erase him but enough to remind him that Nashville still pulled strings. For an industry built on control, Garth's independence was intolerable. In 2001, when he shocked fans by announcing his retirement, Nashville spun the story as defeat. They said he was burned out, that the Chris Gaines debacle humbled him, that his brand of arena country had run its course. Garth himself said it was for family, and that was true. He wanted to be present for his daughters. But beneath that decision was fatigue from constant battles with the machine. Rather than bending to its will, he walked away on his own terms, retreating to his Oklahoma ranch. Nashville insiders felt relief. Without him dominating charts, they could reclaim control. Yet even in retirement, his albums sold, his legend grew, and fans stayed fiercely loyal. When he resurfaced in the mid-2000s, Nashville assumed his time had passed. The charts were led by artists like Toby Keith and Kenny Chesney, and executives treated Garth's return as irrelevant. But his 2005 Walmart exclusive box set shattered records, proving he could succeed without radio, without traditional distribution, and without the industry's blessing. Nashville tried to ignore it, but the numbers were undeniable. He mounted comeback tours, and fans filled stadiums once again. Radio remained hesitant, awards continued to sideline him, but he had proven that Nashville no longer controlled his destiny. In 2009, he took another gamble with his Las Vegas residency. Gone were the pyrotechnics and stadium theatrics, it was just Garth and a guitar. Stripped-down shows sold out instantly, and critics who had mocked him began praising his raw performances. Free from Nashville's politics, he proved he could thrive anywhere. He also turned the industry upside down with digital distribution. Instead of relying on iTunes or streaming platforms, he sold his music directly through his website and exclusive deals. Nashville scoffed, but he sold millions, keeping control of his own empire. Through every stage of his career, Nashville tried to shape the story. They wanted him remembered as someone who soared too high, stumbled, and faded. They wanted Chris Gaines remembered as humiliation, not daring. They wanted his retirement seen as weakness, not a strategic retreat. They wanted to erase his defiance, his independence, his refusal to play by their rules. But none of their efforts worked. Fans kept showing up, kept buying records, kept proving that the power rested not in the boardrooms of Music Row but in the connection between artist and audience. The reality is that Garth Brooks redefined country music, pushed its limits, and survived attempts to erase him. His ambition did not ruin him, it made him legendary. He was not broken by the system, he beat it. No blacklist, no smear campaign, no whispered grudge in Nashville could silence him. The very things the establishment tried to bury, his risk-taking, his independence, his audacity, are the reasons he remains the best-selling solo artist in U.S. history. Nashville wanted him forgotten. Instead, his story became proof that no one, not even the most powerful insiders, could erase the revolution he sparked. Would you like me to expand this even further into a book-style narrative with added scenes, dialogue, and atmosphere, like a biography chapter, or keep it as a detailed documentary-style account? Garth Brooks came into Nashville at the end of the 1980s with a presence the city wasn't prepared for. At that time, country music was conservative, predictable, and carefully policed by executives who rewarded artists that stuck to the traditional blueprint, steel guitars, ballads about heartbreak, and a stage presence that never strayed far from a microphone stand. Garth was different. He grew up in Oklahoma with genuine small-town roots, but he carried a vision far beyond the fences of traditional country. When his debut album arrived in 1989, it wasn't just a release, it was a disruption. Songs like If Tomorrow Never Comes and The Dance had both the tenderness of classic country and the wide emotional reach of pop anthems. His voice moved from grit to vulnerability in the space of a few lines, giving him crossover appeal that Nashville didn't know how to control. Within a year, he was a national name and soon after an international one. The concerts redefined everything. Instead of quietly standing and strumming, Garth treated every show like a rock spectacle, sprinting across massive stages, swinging from ropes, smashing guitars, and leaping into crowds. He turned arenas into theaters of sound and light, giving country fans a live experience they had never seen. His 1990 album No Fences catapulted him into superstardom, with Friends in Low Places becoming not just a hit, but a cultural event. By the time Ropin' the Wind landed in 1991, topping both country and pop charts simultaneously, he had rewritten the possibilities for what country music could achieve. Within just a few years, he outsold Nashville's sacred legends, surpassing Elvis Presley in U.S. album sales and drawing audiences that stretched far outside country's traditional base. But his rise came with a price. Nashville's old guard, executives, radio programmers, and traditionalist artists, saw him as both a savior and a threat. He wore a cowboy hat, yes, but his sound wasn't confined to fiddles and steel guitars. He blended in rock power chords, pop hooks, and gospel flourishes. To purists, this was sacrilege. They sneered at his arena country, dismissing it as flash over substance, while quietly pocketing the profits his records generated. They whispered that he wasn't really one of them, that he was breaking the unwritten rules of what country music was supposed to be. And in Nashville, breaking rules always had consequences. By the late 1990s, Garth took his most daring step, the Chris Gaines project. This wasn't a side experiment. It was a full alter ego, complete with a backstory, a look, and a pop-rock sound tied to a planned film called The Lamb. For Garth, it was about showing the world he wasn't limited to one box. The music wasn't poorly received. The single Lost in You became a hit, and the album sold millions. But Nashville hated it. To them, it wasn't just strange, it was betrayal. They refused to defend him. Instead, they used the confusion around Chris Gaines as a weapon to cut him down. Media mocked the wig, the goatee, the eyeliner. Late-night TV turned him into a punchline. Nashville executives fed the story that he had gone too far, that the project was a humiliating failure. In reality, it was a sign of how frightened they were. If the Chris Gaines experiment had succeeded, it would have shattered the industry's grip, proving that an artist could transcend Nashville's walls. Rather than support him, they chose to bury the moment, erasing it from official narratives, leaving it as an industry-sanctioned scar on his legacy. Even before Gaines, the backlash had begun. Despite record-breaking sales and sold-out tours, Garth started to notice radio resistance. Programmers claimed he was too demanding, too controlling. Award shows quietly overlooked him in categories he once dominated, with whispers in CMA backrooms that he already had enough trophies. Executives grew restless with how much freedom he insisted on. He wanted to decide what singles would be pushed, how his albums were marketed, and what creative risks he could take. For Nashville, that independence was dangerous. They had built an industry on gatekeeping, and Garth Brooks was proving that a star could bypass their control and still thrive. In 2001, he made his most shocking move, retirement. Fans were stunned. How could the biggest-selling solo artist in U.S. history, at the height of his power, simply walk away? Publicly, Garth said it was for family, and that was true. He wanted to raise his daughters, to escape the endless cycle of tours and spotlights. But beneath that decision was exhaustion from battling Nashville's machine. He left not because he had run out of success, but because he had too much of it, and the industry resented the power he held. Nashville tried to spin his departure as proof that he had burned out, that his style had worn thin, that the Chris Gaines fiasco had broken him. But in reality, he was walking away on his own terms, while still on top. During his so-called retirement, Garth never disappeared. His albums continued to sell, his fan base stayed loyal, and his legend only grew. Executives on Music Row muttered that he'd eventually crawl back, desperate for relevance, but he didn't. He waited, and when he did re-emerge in the mid-2000s, it was with a strategy they didn't anticipate. His 2005 box set sold exclusively through Walmart Shattered Records. Without radio play or traditional distribution, he moved millions of copies. It was a direct blow to the system that had once frozen him out. Nashville ignored the accomplishment, but it didn't matter. The fans had spoken. In 2009, his Las Vegas residency at the Wynn marked another transformation. Gone were the rope swings and pyrotechnics, it was just Garth and a guitar. The intimacy was magnetic. Tickets sold out instantly. Critics who had once mocked him suddenly praised his stripped-down shows. Free from Nashville's politics, he had proven again that his success didn't rely on their machine. Then came another defiant move: digital distribution. While Nashville clung to CDs and resisted change, Garth built his own online platform. He refused to sell through iTunes, choosing instead to sell directly to fans. Millions followed, giving him both the profits and the control. Nashville scoffed, but the results were undeniable. He had once again shown he could bend the industry to his will, not the other way around. Through all of this, Nashville tried to write the story they wanted told. They wanted people to remember Chris Gaines as a joke, not a bold risk. They wanted his retirement painted as burnout, not a calculated retreat. They wanted his comeback downplayed as irrelevant. They wanted him remembered as a man who flew too high and crashed. But none of it stuck. Every attempt to diminish him collided with the undeniable truth. Garth Brooks was too big, too ambitious, too fearless to erase. Fans filled stadiums. Records sold by the millions. His place in history only grew larger. The reality is simple. His ambition didn't ruin him, it defined him. He wasn't broken by the system, he beat it. Every effort to control him failed. Every smear campaign only strengthened his legend. No blacklist, no award snub, no radio freeze-out could silence him. He had proven that the power of Nashville insiders had limits. What truly mattered was the bond between an artist and the fans who believed in him. Nashville wanted him forgotten. Instead, he became unforgettable, a figure who reshaped country music and exposed the industry's deepest fear, that control could be broken and the walls they built could fall. Do you want me to expand this further into a long-form, book-like chapter with dialogue, settings, and behind-the-scenes atmosphere, as if it were a biography? Or keep it in this documentary-style deep dive format?